A warm welcome to A Nurse's Lift to Work with Tina and Kate, coaching podcast by two healthcare professionals. We are friends, we are nurses, master NLP coaches, hypnotherapists, parents and business owners. We are busy people juggling many things just like you.
You are in for a treat. We will chat about informal coaching tips, coping strategies, and how to effectively change your mindset and have some fun along the way. So, hop on board with us for A Nurse's Lift to Work. Welcome to Lift to Work. This is Tina.
And I'm Kate. But Tina, it's a nurse's lift to work.
It is. You can tell that I've been up far too early on the beach walking the dog, and I'm already forgetting what I'm doing. But yeah, it's a nurse's lift to work. And we have a nurse with us today. So Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Helen. I'm actually a retired nurse now, but once a nurse, always a nurse.
Yeah. And we have asked you on because you have had such an interesting career and you have a certain set of knowledge that I think a lot of other nurses don't have because of what you've done in your nursing career. So do you just want to step us through it a little bit? What you were doing when you were in the world of work?
Yeah, so I qualified in 1987 as an RGN, as we used to be. And I worked on nights to start with, because in those days, probably similar to how it is now, there weren't loads of jobs to choose from, and I wanted to work in acute nursing, and so I worked on a surgical ward on night duty for the first year, and then I got a job on days about a year or so later, in A&E. And I loved that. But my heart really still was with surgical nursing. So I went back to surgery then as an E grade, because that was the time when clinical grading came in. I thought at that time I could see the future ahead of me in what was happening with nursing, and I wanted to do a diploma. So I did a diploma in professional studies in nursing, it was called, at Coventry Poly it was. Then I carried on and did my degree and got a BSc honours in nursing. And I thought, even though I was still quite young, I thought I didn't want to that sounds awful, as a staff nurse. I wanted to progress my career. So I applied for an F grade post and got it. Then the G grade suddenly retired. So I became a ward sister, and then and this was all really in surgery. Surgery really is my background. What I haven't said is, throughout all of this time, I've always been, I've got big mouth, and I've always spoken up for people, my colleagues, if I felt things weren't right. So I was my course rep when I was doing my training. As soon as I qualified, I became a Royal College of Nursing steward, and I was a steward throughout wherever I worked. And when I became a senior nurse manager, I was still a Royal College of Nursing steward. My nurse colleagues, had no problem with that whatsoever. They loved it because they'd come and talk to me about how to do things right, or they'd got an issue themselves and they liked talking to me because I was a similar kind of standing as them in the trust. But unfortunately, HR particularly didn't like it, and they told me I needed to make a decision about where I was going to go with my career. And I was so incensed that I decided I'd go and work for the Royal College of Nursing because I didn't like being told what to do by HR. So I applied for a job with the Royal College of Nursing, and that's where I stayed until I retired.
Mm-hmm.
Saw lots and lots of changes in the RCN over the years, but I've always kind of moved with those, I suppose, moved with the times, and had a great career, I think, and was able to influence nursing and patient care in a way that was very different to if I was still working within the confines of a nurse manager post, where when I was a manager, I used to feel quite conflicted at times of the things that I was being told I had to do or I had to ask people to do, which I didn't necessarily agree with. And I would say in private that I didn't agree with it, but the public message was the public message, and I had to, hand that out. An example being when, we didn't have night staff and day staff anymore. Everybody had got to do everything, and I was really against that, and said, that'll mean some people won't be able to work for us anymore, or it'll be difficult to cover some shifts, whereas it would have been easier in the past, etc. But I was told no, that was the way it was going to be, and I found that really hard. And we did have people leave, and we did have people very upset by it. And and then years later, we had in the NHS, we had this thing called Improving Working Lives, and I was then working for the RCN, and I'd go to managers and say, well, if you hadn't done what you did years ago, then we wouldn't have had the problem of not having staff working on some shifts or things, people being asked to do things which really was very, very hard for them. And, if you can employ somebody for 2 nights a week, rather than have an agency nurse, surely that's better. But there was this whole, well, if they can't do everything, then we don't want them anymore. But obviously that kind of turned around. So I felt working for the RCN that I would have been able to make differences that I couldn't make within the NHS. And I think I did. I've got lots of, I had lots of people when I retired who senior nurses, directors of nursing, HR directors and such like, that messaged me and said I'd made a really big difference to the people that they employ, which ultimately makes a difference to the patient care. So great.
Yeah. And
Helen, that's amazing. And
it is incredible, isn't it?
the thing I like the most from that is that early on in your career, you knew the direction that you wanted to go in terms of leadership. You knew you wanted to go up, and you took the steps to do that. Do you know what I mean? So you were like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I think sometimes there's almost a fear like, I've not been qualified long enough to do this. I'm not experienced enough to do this. Whereas actually, sometimes the best ideas and the best kind of leadership come from those who are relatively new to the system. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
The downside of that, though, which I did have some difficulties with, which I'm sure you'll understand, is, when I was a ward manager when I was only, I think I was 28. I've got my diploma and I got my degree by then, but I was working with women who were staff nurses or enrolled nurses who were in their 40s and 50s, and some of them said it to my face, but I know a lot of them said it behind my back, was, how on earth can she know what she's doing? She's not old enough. And you have to be very secure in yourself, don't you? I might not be very old, but just because I'm not very old doesn't mean I don't know. And there probably were things that perhaps I didn't have life experience like some of them had, but I would accept that and say to other people with more life experience, I haven't got the life experience that you've got, so perhaps you can help me in this. And I think, again, that's something that we have to, well, we should accept, and that sometimes we need help. Just because we're going down one road doesn't mean that we know everything about that journey. And I think that's somewhere where sometimes people fall down, is that they don't acknowledge their deficits, I suppose, because other people really appreciate it if you accept your deficits and you're honest about it. What isn't a good thing is you just go kind of headlong into something with it and not think about the consequences.
Yeah. I think the best possible leaders definitely have that about them, that ability to say, I do not know, but collectively we probably know. So help me out, guys. Help me out, to do this best for the patients. And it's funny how we find our way into leadership, because I really recognise that dilemma you had, Helen, at the point that you jumped into the post at the Royal College, because I had exactly the same dilemma. I was a steward, I was professional rep for the Royal College early on in my own career, and I had some fantastic training from the Royal College. Like, I had an amazing course on media training, how to speak for nurses, either to the main news channels, if there was a nursing story, or just in general, how to speak for nurses and nursing in a way that was hopefully articulate. I went off and did this training, which gave me a lot more confidence. And I had a very similar dilemma in that the HR and management team said, which side of the table are you on, Tina? Because I would be in situations and changes would be about to happen. And I would say things like, we should ask the Royal College their viewpoint before we go down this road. Or we should think about employment law, or we should think about ways that we could chat to our teams and they could be part of this change. The change might need to happen, but they might have some better ideas than we've currently got sat around this table. And that resulted in, I think, to a degree, some of the senior leadership team, which weren't all nurses, feeling a slightly threatened, uncomfortable feeling about me saying things like that. So I was taken to one side and it was said to me, you have to choose, in exactly the same way it was said to you. And at the time, I don't think there were opportunities in the Royal College at the time, although later on in my career, I did do a senior fellow post for them for a year. But at that point, there wasn't opportunities. And I thought, okay, I will step out of that role formally, but they'll never take the knowledge out of my head. And secondly, I will be a senior leader who knows this additional stuff, and I will influence nursing for lots of more nurses because I'll be in more senior roles. And that was kind of my logic. Because I think some junior colleagues think that senior leadership nurses are some power crazed bunch who kind of just want the power and the pants on over the trousers and the cape, which is all very lovely. And
beautiful.
yeah, and actually, if you talk to senior leadership nurses, you generally find their passion and their drivers are still about making a change at the bedside, or the bedside equivalent if you're in the community or A&E or whatever.
Yeah, and it's just sad that in order to progress in nursing as a career, is that you are taken away from the bedside or the patient. I still feel really strongly about that. Clinical grading back in the 80s was supposed to resolve that, and it didn't. And then Agenda for Change was supposed to resolve that, and it didn't. And now I understand, there's negotiations going on about nursing roles now with the Department of Health and Social Care. And from friends that still work at the college, they're saying they're still not recognising how important clinical work is, and sadly, the way society rewards people is through their pay packet. And if you can't earn a decent salary by being a clinical nurse, then clinical nurses are taken away.
Yeah, so it's really an interesting time for nursing, I think, isn't it? And I hope that nurses find their way to their voice. That's what I would always say, wherever they are. Wherever you are, nurses, wherever you're doing, find your way to your voice. And if that's personally in your day-to-day, or that's finding your way to a trade union or a professional organisation equivalent, but do join one of those things and stay connected to the wider family of nursing, and understand the trends and what's going on and get good information. And I think that for me has always been the great thing about nursing collaborations, wherever you find them, whatever shape they take. We had a Queen's nurse on an episode which is coming out this week, Helen, who now works in the hospice sector, and that felt like a great conversation about, nursing is amazing when you look at the massive family of nursing, really.
Yes. Yeah, and nurses nurses generally are really good at sharing. You know, I think we've probably got through some of the old ways of thinking. You know, a number of trusts, for example, really in the NHS were very closed, and you couldn't share. That, I think that's gone, and I think, you know, nurses have always found a way, whether that through the Queen's nursing route, or whether that through the Royal College of Nursing or Royal College of Midwives or professional organisations. Nurses have found a way of sharing, even when they were told they weren't supposed to.
And I mean, of course, Kate, your Facebook group on for preceptorship nurses, I mean, that's grown now. How many members have you got?
1,600 since August. So as we record this, it's February, it's the beginning of February, and it's amazing because nobody should underestimate the power of community.
Yeah.
And especially when you think, if you spend ages worrying about something and you think it's just affecting you, I bet you bottom dollar, if one person's having that problem, 10 people are, 100 people are, 1,000 people are. And by sharing, you kind of halve the load and learn in the process, because it's all about that continuous growth and that learning and knowing, actually, even if you don't know any of these people, you're still like a family.
Yeah.
Because that's what the community is for me. You know, people comment and I genuinely care about where they're at. What can I do to help make them or improve or set them on a slightly different path through their own solution creation? And that's it. It's a community. And it's the thing about nurses is it's not just us, it's all over the world, isn't it? And by sharing the knowledge between one country and another, we all do the same thing, but we all do it differently. Who does it better? What can we do with that?
Yeah.
Love it.
And I really enjoy seeing people grab hold of their identity as a nurse, because I think people come into nursing for a million different reasons, don't they? But grabbing hold of that identity and feeling proud of that. I've got this friend, and she's got a cracking story, and I love telling this, in that she is an older people's nurse. So in the pecking order of nursing, sometimes older people nurses, you know, they're not as high up the hierarchy as an A&E nurse or something like that, are they, necessarily? But she's always been incredibly proud of being an older people's nurse, a gerontological nurse is a posh name for her qualification. Once she was at a dinner party and she was chatting to somebody, and it was another healthcare colleague, they weren't a nurse, and they turned to her and said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Oh, I'm a nurse, I work with older people, rehab." And he went, "Oh, I couldn't do that." And she said, "No, it's terribly skilled."
Oh, that's brilliant.
I know. And I just love her for that. And it made me think, yes, that pushback of that really solid ownership of nursing is an incredible skill set. Incredible. And the fact that nurses are starting to take ownership of that. And the thing that drives me nutty is when people go, "Well, I'm just a nurse." You're not just an anything, actually, but you're definitely not just a nurse.
Yeah.
No.
Helen, how did you find your way into nursing?
When I was at school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, really. I knew I wanted to do something that would be with people. I've always, apparently, when I was only 2 years old, I could entertain a restaurant full of people by talking. So, you know, I knew I needed to be with people.
You know, that doesn't surprise me at all. But your life and soul.
So I was thinking about I was thinking about joining the police originally when I was still, you know, 14, 15. And then I thought, no, I don't want to do that. No. So, yeah, I think I will be. I think I'll think about being a nurse. So luckily for me, in my my local FE, college, they did a pre-nursing course with A levels. So so you'd still end up with doing 3 A levels, but one day a week you went out and well, we had on a Wednesday afternoon when everybody else was doing sport, we would do what it's like to be a nurse, kind of lesson with somebody who was a nurse, and then on a Thursday we would go out into different healthcare settings. So you could kind of like, it was a bit like dipping your toe in the water, really, about whether you really wanted to do that or it was just an idea. And there were 20 odd of us in our group, and I would say probably about 15 of us ended up going into nursing. But some people said, no, I think dip my toe in the water. It is not what I fancy doing. But I absolutely loved it. And I mean, some of my placements, I do placements in, I remember them all really well. I did placements in different settings. So an adult learning centre, so people with learning difficulties, had a placement there, which was I really very much enjoyed. I had a placement in a old people's home, but I did also have some placements in acute wards. I don't know how they got away with it, but obviously I was only like 16. But anyway, and it was that I thought I want to be a real nurse. I want to work with people who aren't very well and hopefully help them for them to get better. I had a placement in hospice actually as well, and I really enjoyed that. And I know when I was going to the hospice, you know, people said, "Oh, you don't want to go there; it'd be really miserable." And because it wasn't miserable at all, it was a delightful place, Martin Hospice in Warwickshire. So so that's really, and that kind of affirmed that I wanted to be a nurse. Was the pre-nursing course, and I, you know, got my A levels, but came out of it. Obviously, in those days, didn't have to have A levels to be a nurse, but went into and then trained locally, because by then I knew my husband, and we got married whilst I was a student, and here we are, 40 years later, this year, still. Despite the fact that when I got married, I don't know what they called them in those days, the nurse superintendent or whatever, it was like, who was in charge of the hospital from a nursing perspective, called me to his office after we'd got married and said, "I see, student nurse Rowe. Well, actually, you're not that anymore, are you? Student nurse Hancox, I see you've changed your name." And I said, "Yes, I got married." And he went, "I hope that doesn't mean you'll be having a lot of time off sick." Of which I said, "Why would I be off sick because I got married?" And he said, "Because your husband won't want you to go to work at the weekend." Of which my response was, "I haven't just met him. He does know what I do."
Funny idea to have.
I know. Well, that was him all over. I mean, yeah. Anyway, and I didn't have a lot of time off sick, and I qualified, and I got the highest mark in when we took our exams. So there I was, very proud of myself.
Fantastic. And of course, you've had so many roles and responsibilities. How do you kind of, what would your tip be for people, your secret life hack, I suppose you could call it, about keeping sane when you have that sort of, those responsibilities?
I think having other things in your life other than you do this job. So I sing. I'm in a choir. I love singing. That is my release. My release always has been. I've only been in a choir for about 8 or 9 years, but I've always sung. Driving to work, driving home from work, sing, get it out. Yes, it's walking to work, walking home from work, sing. I mean, obviously you get some funny looks from people, but it's a great way of learning songs is great for mindfulness, because the only thing you can think of is the tune and the words. And it's great. It's well, you know, there's lots of research about how it helps your mental health. Even if you can't sing, even if you can't, you don't think you can sing. Everybody can sing. Your tune might be slightly different to somebody else's, but you can sing. So that's my answer to everybody. If they say they're feeling stressed, go and sing. They're feeling sad, go and sing. worried about something, go and sing. That's the answer.
It's that release of hormones, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Helen, I sing with gusto and enthusiasm.
Yes. Well, what I say is
That's a girl band, by the way.
Yeah. Loud and proud or strong and wrong. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I love it when I'm driving because I sing a lot in the car and you pull up and someone else is singing. And you could tell singing as opposed to chatting, can't you? Because it just looks a bit more, like there's more going on. So I like that suggestion, Helen. That's fantastic.
When you'd had in any part of your career, because obviously it's been, you mean, long and with lots of different elements to it, when you've had a bad day, I know we've had the singing, and you know you've got to go back to work the following day, especially if you've got dealing with a difficult or challenging situational colleague. How did you like mentally prepare for that? Because I asked that because I know a lot of the members in the group have got challenges with colleagues. What would you suggest? What would you do to overcome that?
Without going over and over and over it, I think there is a good thing about rehearsing a conversation and rehearsing and trying to imagine what the responses might be.
Yeah.
So if it's a positive response, how then you would continue it. Or if it was a negative response, how you might come back I suppose I could be described by some people as hot-headed. I don't know whether I am or not really. I think forceful, I think probably would be a better way to describe me. But always with respect. So I think even if if you've rehearsed the conversation and you're thinking all the backlash might be, my advice always would be take a breath, think about it because once you've said it, you can't take it back. So there is that think about the response. But also, if we're having difficulties with colleagues or patients, right, we never really know what's going on for them either. So it could be that they're being really blooming horrible to you because they've got really horrible stuff going on. And it's about trying to perhaps put yourself in their shoes. Or I know what you mean, Kate, about I've read some of the comments that people have made on the Facebook group, and I've done a bit of a just rephrase what you're thinking, or put yourself in their shoes, or just be a bit mindful. And actually, their perspective may be completely different to yours about the situation. My advice to anybody is always try and understand the people that you're working with. Try and know them.
Yeah.
I know that's more difficult for some people than others. If you are like I am, I'm quite an extrovert, and I will find out about people, and I'm a completely open book. Everybody knows everything about me. And I know that not everybody is like that in sharing, but trying to be human, have a human conversation with someone and not all about work. I think that getting to know your colleagues is the one tip that I would always say to anybody. Know them and know what their strengths are and understand their weaknesses.
Thank you.
And as you were talking, I suppose it's a question we're about to ask you, actually, Helen, about advice for newbies. What could an experienced nurse have usefully said to you when you were starting out? You wish someone had said to you. But just before we get to that, as you were talking, I was thinking, it's a good thing to remind colleagues that they were new once. And
Mhm.
so with the preceptors and the newly qualifieds and anyone who's new in a job who comes across a colleague who maybe they're a bit brusque or the way they tone a voice is a bit sharp towards you, and that could be a real thing happening. And there could be, like you said, a backstory to that, you know, why that's happening. But it's just to respond to that with the gentleness from yourself, which goes along the lines of, well, firstly, maybe can I make you a cup of tea? So it looks like you're frazzled. But maybe another thing might be, oh, Kate, I just want a bit of advice because I'm new here. When you were new here, when you first came here 10 years ago, what did you find most helpful to know in the early days? So in a conversation like that, you're really reminding Kate that she's experienced. You're reminding her that she too was once new. So you're trying to build a connection between the two of you that goes, I am new. You were once new. And then you're ending in a nice, respectful, like, what advice can you give me? So I think that's something I would really encourage our listeners to try out, that little rehearsed kind of conversation in any new places. But Helen, so newbie advising, what do you wish folks had told you in your early
I
days?
wish that somebody had really pushed that I'm not on my own, I'm part of a team, and care takes place over 24 hours. It doesn't all have to be done on your shift. It's okay for you to hand things over. Because I think as a newbie, that was the one thing that I always used to get everything done before. And actually, you don't. You know, this whole thing, and I think to a degree, there probably are still people that, you know, everybody's got to be washed first thing in the morning if you're in a ward environment. If you actually spoke to those people, quite a lot of them, like I've got a 90-year-old mother-in-law, she would never dream of having a bath or a shower in the morning. She has one in the evening. So this push to everybody's got to gone through, you know, all these things necessarily, you know. So I think for me, and I know it was a long time ago and patients were different, you know, 40, well, they were all different, obviously, but people were in hospital for a lot longer. When I qualified, and when I was a student, this whole thing, everything's got to be done by lunchtime if you were on an early, or everything's got to be done before the night staff come on if you were on a late, it's not. It's not. It doesn't have to be. And care does take place over 24 hours if you're an inpatient.
That's one thing that used to really, really frustrate me. So when I went onto the ward, I'd come from an A&E and a corporate background, so I hadn't done ward work since I was a student. And I constantly would be like, why are we getting everybody up and washed and dressed so early in the morning? Why are we giving them their breakfast at 7 o'clock? If you get me my breakfast at 7 o'clock, I would be very sad and throw a few choice words. Do you know what I mean? And when I said, why are we doing it? Because it makes our life easier. I'm like, but it's not our lives, it's theirs.
No.
And it's trying to change the narrative, isn't it? Well, people will think I'm not doing a good job if I don't get my patients up.
Yeah.
What people? Because really the only people that you need to be working towards are your patients. It's all about your patients. I don't want to watch. Why? Well, does it matter? To us, you know, sometimes, yes, if your patient's depressed and has been neglecting themselves, then yes, that's something that we need to address. But go away.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because we're now in 2025 as we record this podcast, and in the early 80s, a lady called Pauline Ford, a nurse who did actually for a while work at the Royal College of Nursing, published a book called Rituals in Nursing. And I read this just as I was coming out of my nurse training in the 80s. And I just thought, wow, this is like a revelation to me. And it was all the things that we're talking about, nurses going, the dressings need to happen at this time, and this needs to happen at this time. And some of that stuff came from history. So you did the dressings once the cleaning had happened, when wards were old and dusty and the dust had settled, and there was logic to the timing in the day when you would do the dressings, etc. So there was logic for some of it, but a lot of it was just lost in the myths of time. Why do we do it like this? Well, because we do. We've always done it like this.
Oh, I know. I used to get that a lot. It would drive me mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was a matron, when I was a matron in a community hospital, my first Christmas there, they had a habit of doing pleasant things for the patients. Really, really a lovely kind of, coming from a great heart, a great place. And they would buy all these gifts for the patients. They would wrap them up and they would put them on the ends of their beds. And the patients would open them like that. And I said, is that very adult? That feels like a child type thing that you would get your stocking at the end of the bed. So I don't want to do it like that this year. So what I like to do this year, I said, is all the gifts are going to go under the Christmas tree in the lounge. Most of the people who can make it into the lounge are going to get up at their leisure, have a nice breakfast and make their way into the lounge. And we will all open the gifts around the tree with music on, and as patients would do if they were in their home. I said, so that's how we're going to do it. Oh, and there was huffling and puffling, and there was a lot of dissent. And anyway, on the Christmas morning, so I worked the day myself and I came in bright and early, and this is what we did. And by 11 o'clock, most of us were gathered, apart from one or two quite poorly people, in the lounge. And we had the most laughter, and we had cake, and we had mince pies and coffee, and we had people walking distances they hadn't before. And the rehab was better because this was more normal. But the most fascinating thing about this whole story was, after we'd had lunch and we were getting people back for a bit of an afternoon rest, because quite a few people were tired, wanted to lie on their beds. One of the nurses said to me, so we've done it now. Do we have to do it next year? And it just
changing the ritual.
I know, it just summed up the resistance to change, how powerful any kind of person can be, really, but to a degree in the nursing profession, to change.
Time, patience, and I think a lot of explanation as well as to the rationale, because why do you want to do it like that? Why should we do it like that? And there has to be an answer, doesn't there?
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be because sister likes it like this.
Yeah.
So I said so. Although I have to confess to having a strategy which I think is very successful when you lead teams or on any level, which is, if something really is going to have to be done, because it is going to have to be done, because maybe that instruction has come from upon high or wherever, but unfortunately we've got to do this. And whether, like you said earlier, Helen, privately you wouldn't agree with it, publicly you have to say you do, is to say to the team, we have to do this. This is going to have to happen. Do you know what? How it happens, that's up to us. So feel like there's always a choice in the how, even if you can't really have a choice in the what.
I really like that. How we do it. That's ours. I like that.
Yeah. And I've seen healthcare assistants who looked very uncomfortable with the fact that we were going to have to change something. We're like, well, I suppose we'll do it next week then. If it's got to be done, I'm going to take control of it then. And then just, okay, great. So that's quite good, isn't it? This is a lovely chat, and I want to ask you at this point, Helen, what is felt fulfilling about nursing for you in all the different ways that you were a nurse?
I suppose in all aspects of it, affirmation that I'm doing the right thing was the most fulfilling thing, in that go home or be at home at the end of work and knowing I have made a difference. to somebody's life, whether that's a colleague, whether that's a nurse's. You know, when I was working for the Royal College of Nursing, it could be that it was to a nurse who was having a terrible time, and I made that terrible time better. Or to a patient, you know, I've made them comfortable. If it's, you know, somebody you've been caring for who's died, you've known that you've made it the best it could possibly be at the end, and you've done the best you could have done for their relatives. I think that, for me, that's the most fulfilling thing, is knowing that little me made a difference to somebody, however big or small that was. And sometimes you think, haven't made a big difference, but then you hear at a later date, the one thing that you did made a massive difference for that person from their perspective.
Yeah.
Well, that to me feels like a perfect place to finish the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Helen. Thank you for taking your time to chat to us. This has been a nurse's lift to work, and I've been Tina.
And I'm Kate.
You've been listening to A Nurse's Lift to Work with Kate and Tina. Please remember, this is not a replacement for medical treatment or help, so do seek assistance if you need to.
Thank you for joining us. Please do like, subscribe, give us stars, like and share with your friends and colleagues. All the good things.